The gender paradox in leadership selection. This leadership paradox reveals itself most clearly when we examine who gets promoted and who doesn't across gender lines. The disconnect between effective leadership qualities and promotion criteria creates a system where the best potential leaders often remain overlooked. Research consistently shows that women score higher on most measures of effective leadership. They typically demonstrate greater emotional intelligence, empathy, and collaborative decision-making skills. These aren't just nice qualities. They translate directly into better business outcomes. Teams led by managers with these traits show higher productivity, lower turnover, and greater innovation. The data is clear. These leadership approaches work. So you might expect women to be overrepresented in management positions rather than dramatically underrepresented. Yet despite these advantages, women remain strikingly absent from leadership positions across industries. This creates what researchers call the leadership gender gap, the persistent pattern where women make up roughly half the workforce but hold far fewer leadership positions, with the numbers getting worse at each level of advancement. The statistics tell a troubling story about how organizations select leaders. The explanation lies in how organizations evaluate leadership potential. Studies reveal that traits associated with effective leadership, like empathy, self-awareness, and humility, are often overlooked in favor of confidence, assertiveness, and charisma during promotion decisions. Companies consistently select for the performance of leadership rather than the substance of it. They promote people who look and sound like leaders in brief interactions, rather than those who actually lead effectively over time. This creates a painful irony. The qualities that would make someone a genuinely good leader often make them less likely to be selected for leadership positions. The careful consideration, collaborative approach, and willingness to acknowledge complexity that create effective leadership environments read as hesitation or lack of vision in promotion discussions. Meanwhile, quick, confident decision-making and bold proclamations create the impression of leadership potential regardless of the actual outcomes these approaches produce. The problem starts early in women's careers with what researchers call the broken rung phenomenon. McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report reveals that for every 100 men promoted to first-level manager positions, only 79 women receive the same opportunity. This initial disparity creates a pipeline problem that grows at each subsequent level. With fewer women in the first tier of management, there are naturally fewer candidates for the next level, creating a cascading effect that results in the tiny percentages of women in executive leadership. The same research shows that women are less likely to be promoted into manager roles despite having the same qualifications as their male counterparts. This isn't about preparation or performance. It's about perception and bias in how leadership potential is evaluated. The first critical step in advancement is precisely where the system begins filtering out qualified women, creating ripple effects throughout organizational hierarchies. Even more troubling is how women face a double bind when they display the very traits that help men advance. Research shows that women exhibiting the same assertive behaviors as men are often penalized for being aggressive or difficult. When men interrupt in meetings, they're seen as engaged and passionate. When women do the same, they're labeled as pushy or abrasive. This creates an impossible situation where women must somehow be assertive enough to be noticed, but not so assertive that they trigger negative gender stereotypes. The problem extends beyond individual interactions to how we conceptualize leadership itself. Many organizations define leadership in inherently masculine terms, emphasizing traits historically associated with men while undervaluing approaches more common among women. The prototype of a natural leader in many organizations remains implicitly male, creating an automatic advantage for men and a corresponding disadvantage for women regardless of their actual leadership capabilities. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the evidence clearly shows diverse leadership produces better results. McKinsey's 2024 Women in the Workplace report found that companies with gender-diverse leadership outperform their competitors by 25% on average. Organizations with more women in leadership positions demonstrate higher innovation, better risk management, and stronger financial performance. The very qualities that make women effective leaders, which often prevent them from being promoted, actually create measurable business advantages when organizations do promote women. Some companies have recognized this disconnect and implemented changes to address it. When one tech firm replaced subjective leadership assessments with structured evaluations of demonstrated skills, women's promotion rates increased by 30% with no decrease in performance quality. Another organization required that every promotion slate include at least 2 women candidates, resulting in a 40% increase in women advancing to management without any compromise in qualification standards. These examples show that the gender leadership gap isn't inevitable. It's the product of specific practices and biases that organizations can change when motivated to do so. The problem isn't a lack of qualified women, but rather systems that consistently overlook women's leadership capabilities while rewarding traits that create the appearance rather than the reality of effective leadership. Women with leadership skills are often overlooked because we select leaders based on confidence rather than competence, and penalize women for displaying the same traits we reward in men. This creates a lose-lose situation where organizations miss out on effective leaders, while capable women see their careers stall despite their contributions and capabilities. Perhaps most concerning of all is how those who do reach leadership positions often lack awareness of their own limitations. The very confidence that helps people get promoted frequently blinds them to areas where they need improvement. This creates a dangerous situation where those with the most power to affect others may have the least insight into their own performance. The self-awareness gap, blind to their own incompetence. This power imbalance creates a particularly troubling dynamic in the workplace. When leaders lack accurate self-perception, everyone suffers while the person causing the problems remains oblivious to their role in creating workplace dysfunction. Research shows most people overestimate their self-awareness, while truly self-aware leaders remain rare. This massive self-awareness gap creates everyday frustrations that affect millions of workers. The problem becomes particularly destructive when this lack of self-awareness affects people in leadership positions. Leaders without self-awareness remain completely blind to their negative impact on teams and organizations. They can't see the damage they're causing because they lack the fundamental ability to accurately evaluate their own behavior and its effects on others. This creates environments where problems can't be solved because the person with the power to fix them doesn't believe they exist. I experienced this with a marketing director who consistently changed project requirements days before deadlines, creating chaos for the entire team. When employees tried explaining how these last-minute changes affected timelines and quality, he responded with genuine confusion. "I'm just being thorough. A good leader pays attention to details." His self-perception as a detail-oriented perfectionist completely contradicted the reality of his disorganized, impulsive management style. The disconnect was both obvious to everyone else and completely invisible to him. Studies reveal that leaders consistently overestimate their effectiveness, with 77% of employees reporting their boss thinks they're doing a better job than they actually are. This creates the familiar scenario where everyone in the organization knows the boss is the problem except the boss themselves. Imagine working in an environment where the primary source of workplace dysfunction is the only person with the authority to fix it, yet they're completely unable to see their role in creating the problem. This explains why so many workplace issues persist despite seeming obvious to everyone involved. This happens in part because of how feedback flows in organizations. Information typically moves upward in filtered, softened forms. Few employees risk their careers by giving completely honest feedback to their boss about problematic behaviors. So leaders operate with fundamentally flawed information about their performance and impact. They receive constant positive reinforcement through subtle and not so subtle forms of deference, creating a distorted reality where they appear much more effective than they actually are. I spoke with Jamie, who works in finance, about her experience with a self-unaware boss. Our department head consistently takes credit for team accomplishments while blaming others for any failures. What's most frustrating is that he genuinely seems to believe his own narrative. When performance issues come up, he talks about how the team needs to step up without ever considering his role in creating the problems. Everyone sees it except him. The self-awareness gap explains why feedback rarely improves bad bosses. They literally cannot see the problems others observe clearly in their behavior. When presented with evidence of issues, they typically attribute problems to external factors or others' shortcomings rather than their own actions. This isn't always conscious deception. Many truly believe they're effective leaders despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Their perception of reality fundamentally differs from what everyone else experiences. Even more troubling, research shows that power actually decreases empathy and perspective-taking abilities. As Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic notes, Narcissism tends to rise as leaders gain power, while emotional intelligence often declines. The higher someone rises in an organization, the less aware they often become of how their behavior affects others. This creates a particularly dangerous situation where those with the most influence over others' work lives become the least attuned to the impact of their actions. They lose the ability to accurately perceive how their decisions are experienced by those under their authority. I witnessed this phenomenon at a retail company where a regional manager implemented new scheduling practices that created massive problems for store employees with children. When staff attempted to explain the difficulties, he responded with genuine bafflement. "I'm giving everyone equal hours. What's the problem?" His position of power had so disconnected him from the realities of frontline workers' lives that he couldn't comprehend why constantly changing schedules, with little notice, might create hardship. This creates a vicious cycle where incompetent leaders remain convinced of their excellence while continuing to damage the organization and demoralize employees. Without accurate self-perception, they can't identify what needs changing in their approach. Instead, they double down on ineffective behaviors while blaming external circumstances or team members for the resulting problems. The organization suffers, employees disengage, and the leader remains the last to recognize their central role in these issues. The situation becomes nearly impossible to resolve through normal channels because the traditional solution, feedback and self-correction, doesn't work with self-unaware leaders. They reject, reinterpret, or simply cannot process information that contradicts their positive self-image. This is why many bad bosses remain in positions for years despite obvious problems visible to everyone else in the organization. Without the capacity for accurate self-reflection, they cannot begin the process of improvement. This pattern explains why some workplaces feel trapped in cycles of dysfunction that never improve despite seeming obviously fixable. When leadership lacks self-awareness, the organization loses its ability to self-correct. Problems persist not because solutions don't exist, but because the person with authority to implement changes cannot recognize the need for them. The entire system becomes hostage to one person's distorted perception of reality. The illusion of control and lack of self-awareness prevents many leaders from recognizing their own incompetence, making improvement nearly impossible through conventional means. This explains why simply waiting for bad bosses to recognize their mistakes and change rarely works. They fundamentally cannot see what needs changing. Their position provides constant reinforcement of their effectiveness regardless of actual results, creating environments where poor leadership becomes entrenched despite its obvious negative impacts. So if you can't change your boss's self-awareness, what can you actually do to protect yourself? While you may not be able to fix a fundamentally self-unaware leader, there are practical strategies that can help you navigate these challenging situations more effectively. The strategic shield, documentation, and boundaries. Let me show you practical tools that can shield you from the worst effects of poor leadership while maintaining your professional standing. These aren't theoretical concepts. They're battle-tested strategies used by employees who've successfully navigated toxic workplace environments without sacrificing their careers or well-being. Documentation serves as your first line of defense against an incompetent boss. It creates an objective record that can protect you when things inevitably go wrong. Think about how many workplace conflicts boil down to different interpretations of what was said or agreed upon. Your boss claims they never approved that budget increase. You're certain they did. Without documentation, these situations become your word against theirs. And in that battle, the person with more organizational power usually wins. Most employees make a critical mistake when dealing with incompetent leadership. They attempt to verbally correct their boss's errors in the moment, pointing out inconsistencies or flawed logic during meetings or conversations. While this might seem logical, it typically backfires. Your boss feels publicly challenged and becomes defensive, while you gain a reputation as difficult or negative. The problem remains unfixed, and your workplace position becomes more precarious. I learned this lesson the hard way at a marketing agency, where my manager regularly gave contradictory instructions. I'd point out the inconsistencies directly. Last week you said we should prioritize the social media campaign, but now you're saying the website redesign comes first. This approach created tension without resolving anything. My colleague Maria took a different approach. She documented everything through follow-up emails. As discussed in our meeting today, I'll be focusing on the website redesign as the top priority. I'll pause work on the social media campaign until that's complete. This created a clear record without seeming confrontational. The most effective documentation approach involves using follow-up emails, summarizing key decisions, and CCING relevant stakeholders to document agreements. This creates a comprehensive paper trail without appearing defensive or politically motivated. When receiving instructions, present multiple options for implementation in writing. After discussions, send a follow-up email confirming exactly what was decided. Then systematically save these communications in an organized system. This strategy proves invaluable when your boss later denies giving specific instructions or tries to blame you for following their misguided direction. Rather than entering a contentious he said, she said situation, you can simply reference the documented exchange. I'm looking at our email thread from April 12th where we agreed to take this approach. This transforms the conversation from subjective recollections to objective evidence. Consider how one financial analyst described her documentation system. My manager would regularly email urgent requests late in the evening, expecting immediate responses. I started sending confirmation emails summarizing these requests and my planned timeline for addressing them, which created a record of his constantly shifting priorities. When projects inevitably collided, I could reference these emails to show the evolution of instructions I'd received. This approach protected her reputation when deadlines were missed due to her manager's disorganization. Beyond documentation, establishing clear boundaries prevents another common problem with incompetent bosses: their tendency to consume your personal time with their poor planning. Bad managers often create crises through their disorganization, then expect employees to sacrifice evenings and weekends to solve problems they created. Without clear boundaries, these situations can completely overwhelm your life outside work. Studies connect clear work-life boundaries to reduced burnout and improved well-being. This makes sense. Without boundaries, the chaos of incompetent leadership follows you home, affecting your relationships, sleep, and overall well-being. By establishing clear limits on when and how you're available, you create necessary separation between your identity and your work environment. The key is implementing these strategies subtly, protecting yourself without creating unnecessary conflict that could damage your position further. Documentation should appear helpful rather than defensive. I'm sending this summary to make sure we're aligned works better than I'm documenting this so you can't blame me later. Similarly, boundaries should be presented as ways to ensure quality work rather than limitations. I find I produce my best work when I have uninterrupted evening time to recharge, rather than I won't respond to your messages after hours. I spoke with Tomas, who worked under a particularly chaotic manager at a tech company. He created a system where meeting discussions were captured in shared documents, and all project decisions were logged in a tracking system. My boss initially saw this as unnecessary procedure, he explained. But when a major project went sideways and executives started asking questions, those logs protected both of us. He couldn't remember what he'd approved, but we had everything documented. After that, he became the biggest advocate for my documentation system. These approaches aren't just defensive. They often improve the overall workplace dynamic. Clear documentation reduces misunderstandings and creates accountability. Boundaries establish healthier work patterns that can benefit everyone, including your boss. Many incompetent managers aren't deliberately malicious. They're often overwhelmed people without the skills their position requires. Sometimes, structured communication and expectations provide the framework they need to function more effectively. While these protective strategies create essential safeguards, they represent just the beginning of effectively navigating poor leadership. What if you could move beyond merely defending yourself to actively influencing your boss's decisions in positive directions? The most successful employees develop subtle techniques to guide their managers toward better outcomes without triggering resistance or insecurity. Managing up, becoming the boss whisperer. These protective strategies can be enhanced through a more proactive approach that transforms your relationship with leadership entirely. Let me introduce you to a powerful workplace skill that the most successful employees master: the art of subtly guiding your boss toward better decisions while allowing them to maintain their sense of authority and control. This approach, known as managing up, essentially reverses the traditional power dynamic in the workplace. Instead of passively accepting your boss's leadership style and suffering through their dysfunctional tendencies, you actively help them become the manager you need. This doesn't mean taking over their job or challenging their authority. It means strategically adapting your approach to bring out better leadership behaviors in them, while making their job easier in the process. The concept requires a remarkably delicate balance, influencing without appearing controlling, guiding without undermining their authority or triggering insecurity. As Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic's research reveals, many leaders are selected for their confidence rather than competence, making them particularly sensitive to perceived challenges to their authority. The key is subtlety, helping your boss make better decisions while allowing them to feel the decisions were entirely their own. This preserves their sense of authority while improving outcomes for everyone. The most effective approach starts with carefully studying your boss's communication preferences, priorities, insecurities, and decision-making patterns. This creates a mental map of how they operate and where you might have leverage to create positive influence. Do they prefer information in detailed memos or brief bullet points? Are they most concerned with innovation, consistency, or cost saving? Do they feel threatened when challenged directly? Understanding these aspects creates the foundation for effective managing up. One powerful technique is predigesting complex information before presenting it to your boss. This involves taking complicated data or concepts and reformatting them into whatever communication style your boss responds to best. If they're overwhelmed by spreadsheets but respond well to visual representations, transform those numbers into simple graphs. If they get lost in technical details, create executive summaries highlighting only the key points they need to grasp. Studies show that leaders who receive pre-meeting briefs and simplified information make more effective decisions. One software developer implemented this approach with his technically inexperienced manager by creating simple visual flowcharts, showing how different system elements connected. This allowed her to grasp the concepts well enough to make informed decisions and represent the team effectively to upper management, without feeling embarrassed by her technical limitations. Another effective strategy is presenting options rather than problems. When issues arise, many employees make the mistake of bringing the problem to their boss without potential solutions. This forces the manager into a reactive position and often triggers stress responses. Instead, frame conversations around carefully selected options where any choice they make leads to a reasonable outcome. This creates the feeling of control for your boss while ensuring they don't make catastrophically bad decisions. Strategic framing through questions rather than statements represents another subtle but powerful managing up technique. Instead of saying, "We should pursue the social media campaign first," you might ask, "What do you think about prioritizing the social media campaign since the deadline is coming up next month?" This approach invites your boss to consider your suggestion while maintaining their decision-making authority. It feels collaborative rather than challenging. Research indicates that employees skilled in upward influence often receive more favorable evaluations and better compensation over time compared to those who don't utilize these strategies. This makes intuitive sense. You're making your boss look good and feel good about their leadership, creating positive associations with your work and presence. The psychological principle at work here is what leadership experts call leading through serving. By making your boss more successful through your behind-the-scenes guidance, you create space for your own success while simultaneously improving the work environment for everyone. It's not manipulation. It's creating functional pathways in potentially dysfunctional systems. I spoke with James, who works in finance under a notoriously difficult manager. He explained his approach. "I realized fighting against her micromanagement style just created conflict. Instead, I started preparing extremely detailed progress reports before she could ask for them. I'd include answers to questions I anticipated she'd ask. Eventually, she began trusting my work more and checking in less frequently. I was serving her need for information while gradually gaining more autonomy." This strategy works particularly well because it aligns with your boss's self-interest while subtly correcting their worst tendencies without triggering defensive reactions. Most ineffective managers aren't deliberately trying to make life difficult. They're often struggling with their own limitations and pressures. By helping them succeed, you create a win-win dynamic that benefits both of you. They get better results with less effort, while you gain more influence and a better working environment. Effectively managing up when your boss lacks leadership skills transforms the relationship from frustrating to functional by guiding them toward better decisions. You become what some organizational psychologists call a boss whisperer, someone who can subtly influence leadership behavior without creating conflict or threatening hierarchical structures. This skill doesn't just improve your current situation, It becomes a valuable career capability that distinguishes you in any organization. But sometimes individual strategies aren't enough to navigate particularly toxic leadership environments. No matter how skillfully you manage up, certain workplace situations require broader support systems to protect your career and well-being. The strongest professionals recognize when to build supportive networks beyond their immediate boss relationship, and, more importantly, when a situation has moved beyond manageable recognizing into truly toxic territory. Even the most effective managing up strategies have their limits. Sometimes the situation crosses a critical threshold where adaptation is no longer the answer. Knowing when to shift from coping to planning your departure represents one of the most important career skills you can develop. While we've explored strategies for navigating difficult bosses, I need to be completely honest with you. Some situations cannot and should not be managed. They need to be escaped. The challenge lies in distinguishing between normal workplace frustrations that everyone experiences and truly toxic environments that warrant leaving. This line often remains unclear until you've already crossed it, finding yourself deep in territory that's damaging your life beyond the workplace. Research identifies critical warning signs that signal it's time to plan your exit rather than continue coping. These indicators function like smoke alarms. They detect danger before the full crisis emerges, giving you critical time to respond. Learning to recognize these signals could save years of your career and protect your mental health from permanent damage. The most concerning signal, the one you should never ignore, appears when your physical and mental health begin deteriorating. Our bodies often recognize toxic environments before our conscious minds admit the problem. Do you notice yourself experiencing regular Sunday night panic attacks at the thought of returning to work? Has your sleep deteriorated since working under this manager? Are you using alcohol or other substances more frequently to cope with workplace stress? These physical manifestations aren't just inconvenient symptoms. They're your body's alarm system. Research links toxic leadership to elevated stress and long-term health issues. This isn't just unpleasant, it's potentially life-threatening. Your body often recognizes danger before your mind acknowledges it. Listen when it speaks. Studies consistently show that working under toxic leadership significantly increases stress levels, anxiety, and burnout, with effects that can persist long after leaving the environment. Another clear indicator appears when you're asked to compromise your values or ethics. This creates an internal conflict that rarely resolves without removing yourself from the situation. Perhaps your boss asks you to misrepresent data to clients, take credit for others' work, or participate in decisions that harm vulnerable people. These violations create a form of moral injury that extends far beyond typical workplace frustration. When you consistently act against your core values, you don't just dislike your job, you begin to dislike yourself. Your career trajectory provides another crucial warning sign. If you're developing a reputation primarily as your boss's fixer, rather than building your own expertise, you're sacrificing long-term growth for short-term stability. This particularly subtle form of career damage happens when you become defined by your relationship to a problematic leader rather than by your own contributions and capabilities. Ask yourself, are the skills you're developing transferable and valuable? Or are you becoming specialized in managing one person's dysfunction? Reputation damage represents another critical signal. In professional environments, how others perceive you can become as important as your actual work. If your association with a bad boss is negatively affecting your professional reputation, the costs extend far beyond your current role. This happens when you become viewed as complicit in your boss's poor decisions, or when their negative reputation begins attaching to you through proximity. The most definitive sign that exit rather than adaptation is needed comes when leadership above your boss is aware of the problems, but unwilling to act. This indicates a systemic issue rather than an isolated bad manager. When an organization knows about toxic leadership, but chooses not to address it, you've received the clearest possible message about their values and priorities. No adaptation strategy can overcome an organizational culture that protects and enables harmful leadership practices. Research on toxic leadership confirms these warning signs aren't just subjective experiences. Studies show that toxic leaders significantly increase turnover in tensions among employees. The research reveals a clear pattern. When employees experience persistent negative leadership behaviors without organizational intervention, they report higher levels of anxiety, decreased commitment, and ultimately, the decision to leave. These findings validate what many experience intuitively. Some workplace situations are fundamentally unsuitable for long-term adaptation. Recognizing these warning signs allows you to make strategic decisions rather than reactive ones. Instead of waiting until a breaking point forces a hasty departure, you can plan a controlled exit that protects your professional relationships, finances, and mental health. This might involve systematically building your external network, updating your skills, or gradually transitioning responsibilities while searching for a healthier environment. The ability to recognize when adaptation has reached its limits represents its own form of workplace wisdom. Sometimes the most strategic career move isn't figuring out how to thrive in a toxic situation. It's recognizing when that situation requires leaving rather than coping. This isn't giving up. It's making a mature assessment of reality and responding appropriately to protect your future potential. Navigating away from toxic leadership doesn't mean your experience was wasted. Even the most challenging workplace situations contain valuable insights that can transform your approach to your career. The question becomes not just whether to stay or go, but how to mentally position yourself in relation to the challenge you're facing. Your mindset might be the most powerful tool you possess. The ultimate mindset shift, from victim to strategist. The transformation begins with a fundamental shift in how you perceive your workplace challenges. Beyond all the strategies and tactics we've discussed lies something even more powerful: a complete reframing of your relationship with difficult leadership. This mental shift changes everything. After examining hundreds of professionals who've successfully navigated toxic leadership, I discovered something surprising. Those who thrived didn't necessarily have better bosses than those who suffered. They simply approached the situation with a fundamentally different mindset that transformed their experience from the inside out. The default response when working under incompetent leadership is feeling victimized and powerless. This creates a psychological trap that actually compounds the negative impact beyond what your boss is directly causing. I've watched talented professionals become increasingly bitter, disengaged, and stressed as they focus obsessively on their manager's latest failures. Each new mistake or poor decision becomes further evidence of injustice, creating a downward spiral of frustration that follows them home and seeps into every aspect of their lives. Breaking free requires a fundamental mindset shift from victim to strategist, viewing your bad boss as a challenge to navigate rather than a punishment to endure. This doesn't mean pretending problematic behavior is acceptable. It means recognizing that while you can't control your boss's actions, you retain complete control over your response to those actions. The moment you shift from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "How can I strategically handle this situation?" everything changes. This perspective transformation doesn't excuse poor leadership, but recognizes that your response determines how much power the situation has over your well-being and career. As Tomas Chamorro-Premusic's research highlights, self-awareness becomes a critical factor in building resilience against workplace challenges. His studies show that individuals who maintain awareness of their reactions to difficult situations demonstrate significantly better coping mechanisms than those who remain reactive. Research confirms this psychological shift has measurable impacts. Studies show strategic mindsets correlate with better resilience and workplace satisfaction compared to those who maintain a victim mentality. Their circumstances hadn't changed, only their perspective had transformed. This isn't just positive thinking. It's a practical approach that creates tangible results. The shift involves 3 key elements that anyone can implement regardless of their specific situation. First, separating identity from circumstance. Recognizing that working under a bad boss doesn't define your value or capabilities. Second, viewing challenges as temporary scenarios rather than permanent conditions. Nothing in the workplace remains static forever. Third, focusing on response rather than control. Directing your energy toward the elements you can influence rather than those you cannot change. This mindset creates practical benefits beyond stress reduction. When you stop viewing yourself as a victim, you start recognizing opportunities within challenges. The micromanaging boss becomes a chance to develop clear communication skills. The indecisive leader provides opportunities to practice initiative. The credit-stealing manager teaches valuable lessons about documenting contributions. Every frustrating interaction transforms from a problem into a potential learning experience. As highlighted by Chamorro-Premusic, leaders with feedback loops outperform those without. This insight applies equally to managing your own response to difficult leadership. Those who create internal feedback mechanisms, regularly assessing their reactions and adjusting their approach demonstrate greater career resilience than those who remain reactive to external circumstances. This approach transforms even the worst boss experiences into valuable learning opportunities that accelerate your career development and leadership abilities. I've consistently noticed that professionals who successfully navigate difficult managers often advance more quickly long-term than those with easier workplace experiences. The challenges force them to develop advanced communication skills, emotional resilience, strategic thinking, and political savvy that others never needed to cultivate. Ironically, those who master navigating bad bosses often develop superior leadership capabilities themselves, having learned precisely what not to do when they reach positions of authority. They've experienced firsthand the damage caused by poor communication, inconsistency, credit stealing, and micromanagement. This creates an embodied understanding of effective leadership practices that goes beyond theoretical knowledge. Your difficult boss inadvertently provides a master class in what not to do when managing others. The psychological freedom this mindset creates extends beyond your current situation. When you view difficult bosses as challenges to navigate rather than tormentors with power over you, you reclaim your sense of agency in the workplace. This makes you more likely to take calculated risks, speak up when appropriate, and pursue opportunities regardless of organizational politics. You become less reactive and more strategic in all your professional interactions. The one mindset shift that transforms your relationship with workplace leadership is moving from victim to strategist, changing how you experience and respond to the situation. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or lowering your standards. It means recognizing that your response to leadership challenges becomes a skill that benefits you throughout your career, long after your current boss has become a distant memory. With these strategies in mind, you're now equipped to not just survive, but potentially thrive despite working under incompetent leadership. Your difficult boss doesn't define your career trajectory. Your response to them does. By approaching the situation strategically rather than emotionally, you transform workplace challenges into opportunities for growth that others never experience. The skills you develop navigating difficult leadership become professional assets that distinguish you in any organization. The reality is that bad bosses will always exist in workplaces. Organizations will continue promoting the wrong people for all the reasons we've explored. The question isn't whether you'll encounter ineffective leadership during your career. It's how you'll use these experiences to develop exceptional capabilities that remain with you long after these challenging relationships end. The skills developed through navigating challenging leadership become invaluable assets in your professional journey. By understanding why bad bosses rise and adopting strategic coping and advancement methods, you transform workplace challenges into lasting career benefits. Rather than viewing difficult bosses as obstacles, recognize them as opportunities to develop resilience, political savvy, and communication skills that others may never need to cultivate. These experiences provide real-world lessons in what effective leadership truly requires. The strategies we've explored, from documentation to managing up to mindset shifts, give you practical tools to apply immediately in your current situation. Your response to leadership challenges ultimately determines your professional trajectory, far more than the challenges themselves. The power to transform your experience lies entirely within your control.